Welcome back to the Daily Vibe. Please like and subscribe to hear our upcoming podcasts. If you're watching today and have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments below, and we'll be sure to ask them. As always, my name is Kuru.
I'm that guy. We are hyped to introduce our next guest. He is a sim racing expert and Red Bull Racing Esports and G2 Racing coach.
Yeah, he is a former professional sim racer that runs a YouTube channel which explains sim racing, driving techniques, telemetry, and setups. Please welcome Nils Naujoks. How are you doing today?
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. I'm fine.
That's awesome. Thank you for listening. And Nils is also a racing coach. Perhaps the best way to start is to tell us a little bit about your esports career, what got you into G2, as well as coaching now.
All right, so let me sum up 20 years in a couple sentences. So I started sim racing basically back in 2003 when I fell off my BMX and broke my collarbone.
Sure.
Wow.
And then I was kind of tied to do something else. And for whatever reason, I found that wheel at home under my desk and popped it on, started driving a bit, and wasn't bad at all, and suddenly became quite clear I was Counter-Strike player and all that, but it looked like I could go way further in that racing thing. And then there was an ESL Pro Series back in the days around racing.
Yeah.
And then just 2 months later, I qualified for that series, and all of a sudden I became a gamer back in these days. That went on for almost a decade, I would say. And then I had another decade where sim racing didn't have any place in my life anymore, basically. And then became late 2018 or so, I believe, when the Race of Champions made an additional esports championship for top 4 guys to qualify for the actual on-site event.
Yeah.
A friend sent me a message told me, have a look at that. Isn't that something for you? Just do hot laps in the game you already know. I was like, yeah, actually, let me get a wheel quickly. So I went to the store nearby, got a wheel, popped it on again. Didn't turn out to be shit, and qualified for the Race of Champions in Mexico. And then the same guy who got me onto that leaderboard basically told me, well, I have that team. I don't have as much time because I have different responsibilities in G2. Would you be interested in a job? And I was in a transition anyway from one job to another, and then change of plans.
That's pretty awesome. So that race down in Mexico was E-Rock, correct?
Exactly.
And so you guys did a little bit of like sim racing there, but then you also jumped onto like the physical track. How was it? Was it very different racing on the physical track? Different racing sim? How? Yeah, just
Yeah, well, first of all, it was great. Overall, it was a great experience because how we were treated there, we weren't treated as sim racers. We got the same badges as all the other Formula One and IndyCar, NASCAR, whatever guys. And most people on site, they had no clue we were just randoms from the PC. So we got the same treatment. Nobody looked down on us. So I think
that's
that was the
awesome.
first good thing in there. And the other then, of course, the whole experience driving these cars. And they knew from the year before, so they've done that the second year in a row, I think, by that time. They knew that the esports guys who would qualify for that usually can be trusted driving these cars.
Mhm.
So initially we had someone taking us on board. You right away went to the passenger seat. He didn't even introduce us to the car, so he just put us in the seat and said, okay, this is how it works. I guess you know the basics. And here's this huge empty parking lot, so you can basically do it. Yeah,
Just
try
fun.
it out, find the limit. And I think for most of us, it just took like 5 to 10 minutes or so, and then we're like, okay, this works like we know it.
Yeah.
Plus the forces, and getting used to that additional input. But other than that, I think most of us were pretty confident in these cars quite quickly.
Do you find that your nerves in the physical cars come up a little bit more, like when you're racing and such?
Um, so there's certainly more to it, right? The whole
Mhm.
sound, the vibrations, everything that's physical about it, you just take in way more, and you have way more to also judge what the car is doing. So for us, it's like, okay, there's more now that we can deal with. On the PC, we only have the visuals, we have the sound, we have the force feedback in the wheel, but we're missing all the forces, basically. And once you're in the real car, you have so much information that it's quite easy to to tell what you need to do, and the car is very vocal about it in a way. So that
Yeah.
was quite intuitive.
So on the coaching side of it, when you're going into different races and everything, and different coaching individual athletes as well as like a full team, um, I know like I grew up watching NASCAR and Formula One and things like that, and we had pit passes every once in a while, and having that pit leader and everything communicating all the time. Is it the same way in sim racing? And what other kind of communications are you allowed to give during each athlete while the race is continuing?
It depends a bit on each series. For example, in F1 esports, they kind of want an interaction between the drivers and people at the pit wall, so to say, just to have something extra for the broadcast. And the game limits the information that it gives towards the driver quite a bit, so they don't really have an overview of the different strategies that are going on. They just see someone disappearing in front of them, but then it's hard for them to track where they end up in traffic or something.
Mm-hmm.
And we at the pit wall then at least have an overview of the normal broadcast where we could see, okay, now he's stuck in traffic, so maybe if you want to pit now, you can undercut or something. But overall, I think the guys would like to focus as much as they can and not be interrupted. Some others are more vocal, but usually my job would rather be to keep them calm and focused, and it's not really so much information flow.
Yeah. So outside of racing, what do you really look for when you're coaching these athletes? Are you more like data-driven side, more technique type of analyst?
So the guys are all very different, right? They have different backgrounds. Some of them have been in real cars. They have a different perspective on all of it. Some just were gamers forever, and they just tend to be good operating this wheel, but they don't know much about cars. So it varies what kind of information I can give them. But overall, all of them are already far developed drivers. Most of them certainly, I mean, ideally are faster than I am.
Yeah.
So driving wise, I don't think I can teach my guys a lot, at least. But we can still use my coaching experience that I gathered now just in the last half year or so to kind of compare information between our drivers, and then kind of try to point out where some of them gains time and where the other loses or so, and then combine the best sectors, so to say, for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So, with each car and everything, when in your experience, what has been your favorite car to drive in sim racing, for you personally, and then what has been your favorite car in real life to drive, as far as like professionally, or even just the ability to drive that particular vehicle?
So I think in sim racing must have been probably a while back when I was my professional myself about 15 years ago or so.
Mm-hmm.
There were always the cars that were very difficult to drive, where I could set myself further apart than the others, and I usually enjoyed that extra challenge. So I think there was some. I mean, they were non-official cars, but it was like a Formula 2 type V8 Formula car, and that didn't have any assists. Was quite difficult to stay on the grip limit at all times, and I enjoyed that a lot probably.
Mm.
And in the real world, it was definitely at E-Rock, where they have this purpose-built E-Rock buggy, so to say, which is just a frame with very soft suspension and a Hayabusa engine, I believe, with about 200 horsepower, and that sequential shifter. And that car just, whatever you do with it, it always turns to oversteer. So you brake, it oversteers. You turn, it oversteers. You throttle, it oversteers. And it's very satisfying to drive that.
Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun, honestly.
Yeah, indeed. We all enjoyed it, I think.
When so obviously you have your like coaching or you have your like coaching websites on the side where you can do some like one-on-one coaching. I watched one of your YouTube videos where you were coaching a British sim racer, or I think an amateur sim racer. But when you get a new client like coming in and asking for your help, what really are, what are the steps that you take to kind of first look into them, figure out where they are at and how you can help them?
Uh, so, so most of them approach me when they hit the wall, right? Some are just right before the next competition and just try to find that extra tenth or so. But more often than not, it's people who have been trying for a while and kind of feel stuck. Um, most of the time people are within 1 to 3 seconds gap to me or so. So they all know the basics very well. They usually aren't complete newcomers to sim racing who are maybe 5 to 10 seconds off or so and don't know where to go.
Yeah.
It's more like people who already know the racing line where it should be, but they can't quite position the car how they like to. And then have to say, sometimes you watch that. So how we go about then is we just watch that replay on the track and car combination they chose to look at. I will create reference data in the same conditions because in these modern sims, all the temperature, weather, there's so many influences that change how quick the car can actually go. So we try to align on these conditions to make it as equal as possible and the data as comparable as possible. And once I have that data ready, we just go in a voice call like we do just now, and then I stream my screen to him. So, and then we go through the replay, go to the Motec data, and switch back and forth. And I really just try to extract what he might be thinking going into that corner. And so I try to pick up where his feeling is driving that car. And once we figured out what he's thinking there, I can tell him what he's actually doing to the car and how he is creating that sense of whatever he's feeling.
Yeah.
And then, try to fix these minor issues most of the time.
Yeah, yeah. You said that most of the drivers that are coming to you are already experienced. Are you hoping that down the line you're getting more like newcomer sim racers, people that kind of just are looking to get into it but need some coaching, just so that they're not, I guess, bad?
I don't have a preference there, really. It's for now, I think I have like around 50 people or so. So I didn't have I didn't have too many, so to say. But still, every one of them is different in a way. But then again, the mistakes that are done in cars are more often than not very similar. So let's say there are 50 peoples with 50 different personalities and ideas, but there's only 20 different mistakes or so.
Yeah.
So by now, sometimes I find myself, okay, I've seen that pattern before, and I've fine-tuned the way how I explain what the car is doing to them, so my explanations get shorter over time.
Okay.
But I don't have a particular thing that I'm missing, apart from that I'm mostly dealing with men.
Yeah. Okay. So you have had some like female athletes, or I guess you do coach some female athletes?
So in the coaching, which I mainly do for the Assetto Corsa Competizione game, there was one woman that approached me, and it was actually her boyfriend or husband who gifted her the session.
Oh wow.
But it was interesting that he or she definitely had a different approach, right? You usually see men going way above the limit, and then you have to work them back towards the racing line or to the limit of the car. And then I thought it was a stereotype, but it felt like and I only have one to be honest, but
Yeah.
she was kind of approaching the car from the lower end. She was taking way more care. So probably she had way more completed laps than the men have.
Yeah.
But there's always more room, and then she's kind of working towards the limit from below
Yeah.
rather than from above.
Would you say that obviously you've only coached one person like that, but would you say it's easier to coach people to go faster or to like calm down a little bit when going into those racing lines?
I don't think there's a difference in
No
difficulty
difference. Yeah.
towards that. It's more like really finding out why they go too quick or why they go too slow, and then sometimes you just have to convince people to go slower in corners. You will see that in most data is that people try to find all the time in the corner because they think, what difference can I make on the straight? But in fact, most data shows that people are losing time towards me on the straight, and really 3/4 of it, which is usually down to them taking the corner way too ambitious, and then takes them forever to accelerate again. And by that time, I'm just gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, so as far as like coaching, the I was gonna ask about the corners, straights, and everything like that. So taking into that first corner as someone who maybe has a lot more experience, what are you doing as far as like, are you just trying? You said you're just trying to find out the psychology behind why they're taking a corner so quickly, so slowly, things like that, because that's kind of the biggest part. Of the race is just making sure you're not losing everything around that first corner, or is it more of like the technique around just the corner in general?
I think it's more about technique more often than not.
Mm.
So typical mistakes I see is that when people go too fast, they start to turn more, but usually the car is already above the limit of what it can do. And I have to tell these people, if you look at your wheel, right, and look what the car is doing in slow motion, and there's a certain point where the car just doesn't react to turning input, but they keep turning. And once I just show them the slow motion, they already notice. But oh yeah, why do I turn more? The car just doesn't react at all. And just slowing things down for them, take a different perspective, maybe use a chase cam view, which you can't do in the real car. Just go to a helicopter view and show them where the car actually is right now.
Hmm.
So sometimes just a change of perspective, sometimes it's introducing a concept of how much grip the front tire can actually have, and then to show them how they can influence how they are kind of exceeding these limits and then work themselves back.
So, I guess Lane mentioned a little bit there about like the mentality of these athletes. So these higher end athletes that you're working with, ones that have to go into very large competitions that mean a lot for them and for their organization. How do you deal with the mentality of these athletes or help them to train to be focused under pressure?
I have to say that when I came in, it took me some time to realize how close the competition has become in sim racing. Because back then, when I was doing it, it was for sure a nerdy hobby,
Hmm.
and I guess it still is, but it's just way more people who are doing it now. And then, of course, there's also in the end way more people who are on a very high level. So whereas for me back then there were like one or two who could challenge me at the very front of the grids, now it's like 10 people who almost have the same skills, and the fields are just way tighter. So the top 10 are within in Formula One esports can be a tenth or 1.5 to 2 tenths or so, which could be pole position or out of the top 10, and then it's very hard to get any points from these races. So overall, what I want to say is that these guys have way more pressure on their shoulders than I had back then, and it took me some time to realize how this must be for them when their income depends a lot on the prize money because
Hmm.
they are doing this as a full-time profession.
Yeah.
And then depending on very, very tiny differences it certainly brings them on the verge of what you can take mentally. So we're trying to think in the background how we can take some of that pressure away, maybe make them less dependent on prize money. For example, we could pay them as an option, pay a higher base salary,
Yeah.
and then take the risk towards the brand to tap into their prize money as a trade-off.
Yeah.
But they would have their guaranteed income on a higher level, and they would be freed up more for these races, which gives them more headroom and are less scared, which again should lead to better results.
Yeah.
So for us, this is an idea we're pursuing. Plus, additionally, because I mean, I can drive them in a direction, I can give some help here and there, but I'm certainly not a health professional in the mental side or psychology side.
Yeah.
But let's say, I'm as much aware as I can send them to professionals, and we've picked that up with a few guys in the team now to
Okay.
more of a test. But I think the way it works, we could extend that engagement. So they just work with a mental coach right now who runs them through his program. Um, and hopefully they just get some tools where they can learn to focus better and kind of exclude all this pressure somehow from going into the race.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Now it sounds like the mentality side is obviously very important. Outside of that, is there anything that you kind of tell your athletes to do, like physically, or any other training outside of just sitting inside their, I guess, their sim machines?
Yeah, certainly. If you think of the real racing drivers, they usually have time in the car of maybe Friday to Sunday, right?
Hmm.
And then on the Friday, there's free practice 1 and 2 in Formula One, 90 minutes each or so.
Yep.
Another one on Saturday before the qualifying. And let's say total they have a track time of 4 to 5 hours maybe or so. Most of the time is usually in the pits. And our guys can just cover that time in a day easily. And they
Yeah.
do so every day for a duration of 2 weeks before going into the race. So they're sitting a lot more than the actual race drivers, and that usually takes a toll on the lower back. So when I joined the team, I was trying to address that or have an overview of which problems the guys have, and I found some general training plans for racing drivers that I introduced them to, but working remote, it's quite hard to make them accountable and keep pushing them to do these trainings. So additionally to that basis, so to say, we now are also working with a coach that also works in Red Bull UK with many athletes, and he's now also working with some of our esports drivers
Wow.
and making a little more specific training with them that helps them mitigate the very sim racing specific issues that can come up.
Yeah.
So, I don't know how much recruiting that you do personally, as far as like for G2 racing, but when you're looking for new racers, what's kind of the process that either you or the organization take in order to start that process?
So I think most of the time the trigger would be bad results or bad behavior. And so far, since I'm on the project, we didn't do much to the roster at all.
Hmm.
I think I basically did. I think in F1 esports you're forced to pick a driver, so they have this pro draft where they say, okay, we need some process for new drivers to come in, so that the teams don't lock out anybody who isn't already in there. And they also want a storyline of, I don't know, young people, newcomers making their way through PlayStation or Xbox, and then just get better and qualify for the pro draft, then get picked up by a team, and their life changes. That's the
Yeah.
storyline they want to see. But more often than not, we are very satisfied with the guys we have,
Hmm.
and
Good.
we sometimes don't want to have that draft. But for now, this is the situation we have. So we have a few drivers coming in and out. Plus for other games, I mean, sometimes sim racing that's just a new game, and when your drivers are already occupied and their seasons aren't going away, then sometimes you just need new guys. I think overall you don't have to be the first to pick a talent, because in the end, if you're a big brand, I think you always have the better offer down the line.
Yeah.
So we can pretty much take more, if I had to go to soccer, take the Bayern Munich approach and let talents develop in other teams, and then when they turn out to be really useful, then take them on board for the next steps or so. But other than that, of course, we're taking a look at what's happening in the scene, and if we see fit or like a super fit in a way to the brand, to the project, and racing talent, of
Hmm.
course, then why not go ahead and
Yeah.
take that risk. But overall, there's not, at least in our team, not too much fluctuation right now.
Yeah.
Good.
And I know this is jumping back a little bit back to training, but so obviously a lot of Formula One athletes and such. I'm a huge Formula One fan, so I obviously watch a lot of them, like their training schedules, how they train physically, and a lot of them try different ways to train their reaction time. Is that something that you also kind of incorporate with sim races? Is reaction time as important for sim racing?
Um, so two things to this. Certainly, reaction time will help you. The other thing is the guys drive these cars so much that usually their way of driving is being able to predict any potential behavior of the car. So usually they're not in need of really reacting to the car, and they can already kind of go ahead with their counter steering or whatever because they're expecting the car to do a certain thing.
Yeah.
So reaction isn't necessarily the biggest factor.
Okay.
Nonetheless, I would like to see this incorporated in their training, but I think it's quite difficult to do because you always need a second person,
Yeah.
and especially like during like everybody being forced to be remote right now, it's quite difficult. But also it's quite expensive because our guys are in Denmark, in Finland, in the UK, in the US, in France, in Germany. And we would need a different coach in each country. So yeah, probably costs would be a factor in that.
Yeah. Sure.
So, so does internet play a big part in this? I mean, when you're like doing a training, let's say just someone from the US, how difficult is it to train with someone online from so far away?
You mean like within the team or for the
Yeah,
coaching stuff?
yeah, within the team or even the coaching.
I think the whole ping thing in racing I think only Australia and New Zealand were a problem last year or so on iRacing.
Okay.
But other than that, I think people from the US do take part in these series. So that there might be one crash or another, which could be down to that delay. But overall, at least to me, it doesn't appear like it's the biggest topic of them all. So you can drive from all across the globe as long as your connection is good.
Yeah. What so just talking about, I guess, just issues in sim racing, what are the big issues right now in sim racing, and kind of how are you looking at it as a coach and like a managing person?
I think so. First and foremost, Corona gave this a big push, and I think some of the problems that we had previously in sim racing, probably have since a decade or more, is that there is a professionalization in some parts of the community, and some drivers, I can only speak for mine really, who take this very professionally and invest all their time into it, and then they also understand that there's time which is dedicated to media and their world. Of course, it's social media being present and all that, plus doing some sort of training or prohibition to stay healthy and stay in this for longer potentially. But also, ideally, some have understood that unlikely they'll be in sim racing for 30 years or so. Right? This
Yeah.
doesn't look to me like the career you can do until you're very old. So they have a short amount of time where they can be professional and benefit from this. So they right now should kind of leverage on the attention that is on them, or the spotlight that is on them, and try to build a business for afterwards already. But most of them are so young that they don't quite have this perspective yet. But I guess it sinks in over time
Yeah.
that they will need to do this. I forgot the question.
The the question was just like issues that sim racers are currently
Oh yeah,
facing.
sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
indeed.
Yeah.
So yeah, professionalization in some teams is happening. In some tournament organizations, organizers have professionalization, and they try to understand the ecosystem and all the, like for example, when Repo comes in this, and we finance, or they finance the team. And that's quite a lot of money in the end that goes down the line. So they want to have a return one way or another. And then there are like games and leagues happening. Yeah, you can have this car, and it's going to be, I don't know, a BMW, but you can't brand it. And then
Okay.
we're like, well, thank you, but we're in this for exposure for our own partners and brands, because else how are we going to make this happen for our drivers? How are we going to keep these drivers ready for your tournament to drive on the highest level?
Yeah.
And I think more often than not, tournament organizers were thinking as the sole party in the whole ecosystem, or in the whole series, that are trying to make a profit from it, but they are not thinking that, or not acknowledging how much the teams are investing, not taking them on board and make, I don't know, some sort of franchise system or so,
Yeah.
right? And like it's very typical in the rest of esports, where you have in League of Legends a proper franchise system, or in Rainbow Six or Counter Strike and all that, where the teams are always on board in the discussions how to run the league. And in sim racing, more often than not, there's like the, I don't want to say dictator, but there's just one party really telling how it all works. And then in the background, you sometimes have parties who play several roles, right? There's one party that could be an agency for drivers, but they also have ties with certain teams they are representing. And then being an agency for that driver is very difficult, because they will likely always put them in the same team. So they can't offer them all the options. Plus, they happen to be also a tournament organizer, and then their own drivers might know earlier what the track and car is, so they can practice ahead. And there's just a couple problems that come with one party playing too many parts of that ecosystem, for example. So we'd need to have differentiation of powers, so to say, right? There should be
Yeah.
teams, there should be tournament organizers, but you shouldn't be aligned in between.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's no overarching power there to say, okay, just because you're, with this track, or you can have access to this track early, doesn't necessarily mean you should have access to this track early, because that's a huge advantage going into a tournament.
Yeah, I mean, if you're the tournament organizer and you kind of want to bring your name out there as a team, then why not make advantage of the
Yeah,
advantage that you have, right? So of
yeah,
course you tell your drivers,
of
and
course.
then you have your brand winning your own races, which is fine for any sponsor who buys into that. And certainly, if I had the chance, I might be tempted to do the same. But I think overall, and thinking long term for sim racing, I guess there would need a separation of this. But then on the other hand, I'm not sure how it works in real racing. I guess it's all just a bit too tight there as well.
Yeah. I mean, just watching Drive to Survive on Netflix, it really shows the real drama that happens in the background of just racing in general. We're talking about that. So from looking at your YouTube channel, I see you raced from Silverstone. You even raced on Kyalami, which is probably about 15 kilometers away from where I grew up in South Africa. So what is your favorite track to race on or just train on?
It's difficult. I mean, every track has its own kind of thing to it. I have to say, I haven't driven Kyalami an awful lot. I don't think at all before it came on ACC because it was always a track that didn't really matter in Formula One, at least
Yeah.
for the time I watched Formula One.
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
it was in the 70s or so,
Yeah.
but I guess the layout was quite different back then.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I never driven Bathurst because it was in Australia, and I certainly wouldn't get there anytime soon, or definitely not for watching a race. I'll do different things in Australia, but
Yeah.
it wasn't also in most other games because I mean F1 was always something I played, and then you have these typical tracks. So I'm personally a big fan of Hermann Tilke tracks.
Okay.
If you have a fast car. But yeah, I like Bathurst a lot when it also came to ACC just because of how challenging it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you watch any other like types of racing or like I mean I guess what are your favorite types of racing to watch?
Usually I like overpowered, low downforce touring cars. So if I had to choose, probably V8 supercars in Australia would be something which is really fun to watch.
Yeah.
Of course, F1 will always have its thrill,
Yeah.
but we all know that the races sometimes only have the thrill really when things not go as planned, so to say, right? Right. We see
Yeah.
Mercedes winning, however the race goes
Yeah.
basically right now, and we need like artificial drama to at least make it a challenge for them.
Yeah. No, that's very true.
And if it wasn't for MotoGP, I probably wouldn't watch it all. And usually MotoGP is always entertaining. So I like to watch more motorcycles right now than cars actually. But I don't
Okay.
think there's a sim yet that gets that across very well.
Yeah, I wouldn't imagine so. I hope so. That really sounds like a really fun sim that would that I'd probably take part in. With so talking about just MotoGP, what like do you have a specific driver that you support or anything like that?
I think I mean, for me, it was always I would, for whatever reason, go with these who had the most magnitude in a way. So when I grew up watching like the first motorcycle racer, so it was certainly Valentino Rossi,
Yeah.
who was always that guy who would excel and push to the limits and above and then go again, and he would never give up. So he certainly had something to it. But then these days, there are several who have exceptional skills, of course, but then there's just one guy that sticks out. But I was also never the fan type, right? I support everybody who performs, right? I was a huge Schumacher fan back in the days. I mean, I'm German. I had no other choice, and I mean he did everything well. But when Hamilton came in driving against Vettel, I just acknowledge everyone who performs well.
Yeah. Yeah, I was growing up. I was a huge Schumacher fan. Like my dad had the jacket for me and everything, but now I'm more of a Max Verstappen fan. I like how aggressive he is. Makes it
Why not?
exciting.
So you were talking about brands approaching you with their cars and everything, and kind of the different negotiating that goes on between you and these brands. But what it's been like, holy crap, this car is able to is letting us race with it. Like what has been the brand that you've been most excited to use since being a coach, as well as like letting your players be a part of it?
You mean what I like to play when I'm on the virtual track?
Sure. Yeah. Or like I see BMW, I see Chevy on your shirts there. So I just didn't know like what brand were you most excited for to come approach you and be like, we want you to represent us.
No, that's usually not how it works. I mean, in the BMW G2 deal, it's more about I think the car manufacturers are going mainstream always, and I think they just have an interest of tapping into the young audience,
Hmm.
and
Gotcha.
the whole BMW branding for G2 is basically around everything that is mainstream esports. So more like most of it certainly is focused on League of Legends actually,
Okay.
and then would be some other major esports titles. But their target was never G2 sim racing, so to say, because BMW also already has their own sim racing team, and it's just with the real world coming to sim racing, it gets more complicated because everyone has their ties already in the real world, and they're not going to cut it for sim racing.
Yeah.
So if BMW comes into sim racing, they have certain partners already on board in the real world that they're not going to ditch in sim racing, or at least needs a good reason to do so. And therefore, it's usually it's tricky with these big brands.
Yeah.
How has Red Bull helped you guys with pursuing other sponsorships as well as like the team in general? What kind of impact did that bring right away?
Yeah, so I mean, my job basically is day-to-day management of the team, keep them happy, surface issues, and bring them across, try solving them. So I'm not in the partnerships team that is talking to
Okay.
I don't know what brand right now, and trying to make the deals. So of course, when you go into the Repo ecosystem, they have ties all across the world with potential brands, and I guess there gets more talking done afterwards
Yeah.
once you have the Repo deal in. But I've no idea about details there, to be honest.
Okay.
With oh man, why am I forgetting my question? Oh yeah, yeah. So as if a person wants to kind of get into sim racing, obviously there's a lot of different hardware that they can look at buying, whether they're just a beginner or they're pretty serious about it. Um, and I saw that you had a lot of like information on your website to really help these people trying to get into sim racing. How would someone get into sim racing, and what really should they look for?
I mean, no one just picks up sim racing from scratch. I think everybody has played racing games
Hmm.
at one point or another in their life, and it's certainly the PlayStation or so, which it was for me in 1994 or something.
Yeah.
Um, and so everybody already has some idea of racing or has done it before. But if you want to go into sim racing, usually that means going down to having a wheel and pedals or so. And at that point in time, you probably also want to maybe figure out if you're there to stay. And if you just want to make a test, certainly go for the lower end equipment, so your investment isn't too high and not too risky. But usually everybody gets captivated by it, and then you will eventually go for higher or medium range equipment or so, just to take that out of the equation a bit and worry more about your driving than having the wrong hardware or so. I mean, there's no wrong hardware. It's just, of course, there's differences, right? When the price range is from 200 up to 2,000, there must be a difference.
Yeah.
Um, and there is, right? So if you know that you're willing to stay, you first have to choose maybe, do I want to go hardcore? Like, do I want a proper sim with everything involved, all the pain, all the difficulty, all the engineering stuff you just
Yeah.
can't do without? Or do you want to be in this like in between sim and arcade stuff? You just like the racing, but you don't care too much about the whole complexity of it. And then you would go for the F1 game or Grid or something like that, or Project Cars, which is coming, right?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that will be the first choice you probably have to make, how deep you want to go, and then maybe put your hardware on the same page as your intensity in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like you can really just almost fall down a black hole there. You could just keep going.
Absolutely, and I haven't found the stop yet. 20 years in, there's no stop.
Oh man! So if you're starting this now, good luck in 20 years.
Yeah.
So are you like do you keep any of your old stuff just as for like memorabilia, like your first wheel or your, when like you stopped playing professionally into coaching? Have you kept any of that stuff?
Didn't keep it, but it's with good friends who back then needed spare equipment. So I know most of my old hardware actually still exists, like a
Very
Logitech
nice.
G25, probably still running as how I left it, very durable. I know a friend has it who just occasionally drives, so for him it certainly still works. And I know I had this Logitech Red Momo Force wheel, which was one of a kind back
Yeah.
in the days, with the only one that has a proper leather rim and quite I'm probably, if I drove it today, I would say, "What the fuck is this?" But back then, this was, wow. This is quite immersive. This is an experience. There's actual force feedback that tells you something.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't keep it. Actually, I don't remember, but I certainly passed it on to someone. I think I even signed it for fun. I
Oh,
didn't really
that's
mean to.
awesome.
But it was more for fun. Come on, I signed it, but we were making jokes of ourselves there. Maybe this has changed these
Yeah.
days.
I was gonna say, I've definitely, when I first started cycling, I definitely signed 1 or 2 jerseys and gave it to my friends. I was like, this is just in case I make it big one day.
Yeah, more like this.
But I mean, honestly, the care you have for just helping athletes grow is extremely astonishing. Not to mention the data crunching that you do in the background to kind of help them out. I cannot thank you for enough for already coming onto this podcast, Nils.
Yep. Happy to come again.
Yeah, thank you for all the time today, Nils, and we look forward, hopefully, to have you back on at some point. I hope our listeners learned a lot today about sim racing, the complexity of it, and just what it takes to become a professional athlete.
There you go.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for tuning into the podcast. Please like and subscribe. Don't forget to check out our socials. We will be uploading this conversation with Nils onto our YouTube channel, so keep a lookout there. But until next time, cheers.